Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Mercenary Historian channel. My name is David. I am the aforementioned Mercenary Historian. I'm a professor of history, and I am here to talk to you about history, great, small, and for the month of October at least, weird. Now, I have to say this because literally you all know what's coming. I have to say it. Please hit the notification bell, the like and subscribe button. It really, really helps with small channels like mine, even though I am clearly an amateur at all of this. I'll be building up. My quality seems to get a little better every time, so, grow with the channel, if you will. If you like what you hear, please spread the word. And I'm going to continue my October series with, well, you all know what I'm talking about. Why? Because there's a title on the video. You can see it right there. So I'm not going to preamble that too much. We're going to talk about ghosts. However, I do need to clarify something right off the bat. I'm not here to debate the existence of ghosts, debate evidence on ghosts. You're more than welcome to do so in the comments, but I'm going to address the historical context of ghosts. Now, it's really unsurprising if you look at it. When I say the concept of the ghost, the wandering spirit, has been around forever. In fact, ghost stories are one of the most enduring legends in all of human history. Almost every ancient culture has an example of a ghost story. I'll give you a few, like the Babylonians. Their ghosts were almost always spirits of family members with a task, devious spirits, or those cursed by the gods. The Egyptians, their whole culture and faith is built on satisfying and dealing with the dead and preparing for the afterlife. The ancient Greeks had specific types of ghosts. They had the unburied, the violently deceased, and those with unfinished business. Oddly, they considered battlefields to be incredibly haunted because they presented the opportunity for all three of those things to happen simultaneously. Now, clearly, the Greek view on ghosts has informed the modern Western viewpoint. The Greeks also added necromancers to the party. Necromancers could raise not the physical dead, but ghosts to pester people. But there was a great cost in putting this kind of curse on someone. One other interesting thing about the Greeks, their goddess Melido was the goddess of ghosts and nightmares. It suggests that the two were one and the same to many of the Greeks, which is interesting the more you think about that concept. The Chinese, on the other hand, their ghosts were very specific and structured in such a way that they were remnants of family. They almost always haunted the family, trying to tell them something, trying to get them to complete a task or to finish, or to get them to behave properly so they don't put shame on the family name, right? The Romans actually kind of followed along that same path. They had similar beliefs to the Greeks and went to great lengths to appease spirits, which really makes sense when you like the Chinese, understand how much of Roman culture relied on the concept of paterfamilias and the lineage of ancestors and who your family name was. The Romans, by the way, also start, as far as Western culture goes, start adding inhuman spirits to the roster, at least more formally, right? There had been inhuman spirits listed before, but, as we're talking about ghosts, which are, by definition, the spirits of deceased humans, there we are. Skipping forward a little bit, the medieval period was jam-packed with spirits. From spirits that acted as harbingers of doom, like the earlier Banshee, to Arthurian spirits that acted as guides, spirits that would inform, spirits that would send you and lead you to your doom, like the Will-o'-the-Wisp, or to your safety. Right? Spirits seemed to roam the countryside at will in the early medieval period. Part of this was due to the blending of cultures you're seeing at the time. It is a liminal period, an in-between, as things are changing from one to the other, with pagan cultures meeting new Christian beliefs as they move into Northern Europe. They collide with old stories being retold in new ways with new Christian concepts added to them. Effectively, the wandering spirit was more popular and more prolific than ever in human history. But later, the Catholic Church, which was effectively the only powerful church in Europe at the time, as far as Christianity is concerned, introduced the concept of purgatory in 1274. Purgatory, this edict stated that clearly some people went to heaven, many people went to hell, but there was a gray area in the middle where you're not quite sure where you're supposed to go. Those people on death would go to purgatory, a middle ground, if you will, not torture or horror like hell or paradise like heaven, but somewhere in the middle until your ultimate fate could be decided. This meant, by new Catholic doctrine, that no spirits, human ones, could reside on earth, and that anything supernatural was, by definition, demonic. This never really stuck as well as the church would have liked, and ghost stories continued and even outlasted the idea of purgatory during the Protestant Reformation, as new denominations rejected the idea of purgatory, which, by the way, the church eventually gave way on itself. Well, the Catholic Church gave way on itself. Now, something else I have to mention around this time is funereal rituals. The way funerals were conducted and to some point are still conducted. Funeral rituals, you'd have no idea how many funeral rituals exist in whole or in part to ensure that you did not receive a visit from an unhappy deceased relative. Bodies were bathed in ritually cleansed water, purified with blessed oil. Rituals of faith were said over the body, and bodies were buried at certain depths for their symbolic value and to help keep the spirit in place. Or people were cremated along with certain rituals to provide time and ensure the comfort and rest of those who had passed. You see these kind of funeral rituals all over India, China, Japan, indigenous Americans, Aboriginal society. All of them have their own set funeral rituals for these purposes. Now, oddly enough, and maybe not so oddly, these rituals um, also provide time for grief and recovery. Um, Unfortunately, those rituals fell apart. They all disappeared. Well, not all. Many disappeared for Western cultures. Why? The advent of the Black Plague. A lot of the way we do funerals today are still influenced by the way the Black Plague worked. The death toll was so high and the pace was so rapid that many of the funeral rituals at the time just fell away. For example, in villages, when someone died, it was traditional to ring the church bell to inform everybody that it happened. However, during the Black Plague, the bells would never stop. So the practice was set aside. Set burials had to be set aside because of the massive amount of deceased. Things changed very rapidly. Interestingly enough, we don't see a lot of ghost stories right in this period. Now, the art of the period clearly starts to depict death as a physical opponent and a character in and of themselves. The concept and pictures of the Grim Reaper start to show up, where death is literally chasing people down and hunting them. But not a lot of ghost stories. The amount of spiritual sightings begin to fade a bit. Maybe the catastrophic events of the era limited the time they had to observe spiritual phenomenon, or maybe, as was true in many smaller villages, there was simply no one left. Now, we have continually tried to prove the existence of ghosts, to capture the idea and concept of who ghosts and communicate with the dead. That's been one of the oldest human endeavors. But the practice of spiritualism in and of itself saw its biggest revival during the Victorian period. Once again, this is a liminal period, a moment where things are rapidly changing from the old system to the new. As I mentioned before, these moments usually see an increase in spiritual interest. World cultures during the Victorian era are in a tremendous level of change. The Industrial Revolution has finally taken hold. The way people see their lives is completely altered. So we see a huge upswing in interest in the supernatural to go along with that. And literal explosion of spiritualists and mediums and fortune tellers burst onto the scenes. 18-year-old girls that say they can talk to the dead are invited to the great royal courts of Europe, such as Russia and other places, to try to talk to the ancestors. But often the answers these spiritualists get are, let's say, limited. Right? And the reality is, these spiritualists, a large majority of them, used all sorts of tricks to part those who wanted to talk to the dead from their money. And they were inordinately clever. They had a device called the magic lantern. It was a rather primitive by our standards projector that would be used to project light images on smoky backgrounds to create a spectral image. They would hire chimney sweeps in some of their larger seances with big houses. The sweeps would move across the roof and hide in chimneys and provide pre-timed knocking sounds to coincide with the seance. They'd hire ventriloquists. They'd use invisible ink, flash paper, new lighting effects. They'd superimpose images on photographic plates, tripwires, sliding ghosts. Many of us use them as Halloween decorations now. They would even have special candles made in pre-prepared seances that were infused with the deceased's perfume or cologne. Picture how much of an influence that would have on people that wanted to believe you're there at a seance. It's dark, it's tense, you're waiting for something to happen, and you suddenly smell the cologne of your deceased husband. It's convincing. Other scams included ones where the con artist would tell the target or the mark that they were under a curse or a malady done by a ghost or a relative or someone else they had offended, and that they're only the spiritualist charms could fix this problem, usually for an exorbitant fee, or more than likely a lot of exorbitant fees backed one by the other. Do I really need to? Well, I guess I do need to say it. Some of you have probably figured out that that particular scam I just mentioned is perfectly suited to our new modern technological society, right? Some of you may have even have tripped over a few of those in your time. Some things are universal, right? This reached its height right after World War I. Once again, not a surprise, given the sheer scope of sudden death, not only from the war, which we're talking 18 million people, but from the Spanish flu as well. Lives cut off in an instant with little or no explanation or understanding, left people wondering, left people intrigued or desperate. Tens of thousands in the attempt to talk with deceased loved ones fell for every single form of scam. Harry Houdini, one of the most famous magician of his era, still common, well-known household name, had a great side hustle where he would follow friends to seances and then explain how they were done. He even made it part of his life's work to close down these fraudsters, even getting to Congress in an attempt to make fortune-telling illegal within the United States. He wasn't quite successful, but we do start to see the advent of what are later called bunco squads, where the police actively work to shut down spiritualist con artists and others of that type. On the other side of the equation is another famous name, Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes. Doyle was a believer. He deeply bought into the concept of spiritualism in his era, but after his son's death, World War I, he became almost obsessed with contacting him, spending a large portion of his personal fortune only to be repeatedly disappointed by con artists all over the world who saw his bank account, saw his belief, and rushed to try to convince him of the legitimacy of their claim. As I said before, if there's money to be made, there's always someone out there willing to take that extra step, to take advantage of someone. Now, belief in ghosts, spirits, is still big business, right? The vast amount of ghost hunting TV shows and the tens of thousands of video channels dedicated to it on this platform alone prove that easily, right? But whether you're a believer or not, ghost stories have been around with us from the beginning. From simple depictions in stone carvings to the most brilliantly edited, can't talk. Speaking of which, to the most brilliantly edited videos out there. I don't see that ghosts and their stories and our curiosity and fascination with the topic will ever disappear. So there you have it. Our short historical talk on ghosts. Please, like I said before, ask questions. I have actually a whole list of Victorian era con artists and their scams if you're interested in how they did it and who they were. I left that out of the video to tease you into the comments if you want. Like I said, oh yes, before I forget, as I said, I don't think I said this yet, but I'll announce it now. In November, I'm going to start a small gaming channel. I'm going to review every now and again a game that catches my eye or catches my interest. The first one that seems to be on deck for November is actually an Italian company called Aces Games. They created a game called a game system called VHS, very horror scary. They hit me right in the childhood. I'll show you how. The game comes in a box, just like this. For those of us who spent our time prowling blockbusters in the late 80s and early 90s, the video cassette box was, well, just part of our great memories. And direct-to-video horror movies were a big one. So they're short games. I'll get into it in the channel itself, but you know, that's something else to look forward to. At the beginning of, we're coming to the end of October now, and at the beginning of November, my video for next week, I'm going to dive into some different type of history. I'm going to talk about U.S. elections, seeing as how we have one of those coming up. I'm going to mention the two most divisive elections in U.S. history, or at least what I consider them to be. They're not the ones you think, unless you're a historian. I could be wrong. So, once again, thank you for joining me. And that's what I've got for you. See you the next time you hit the play button.